Today on the channel we have an Asus P6T Deluxe with some memory problems. Let's take a look. This board is from around 2008 and it's the first board which supports the brand new i-series Intel processors like the i3, the i5 or the i7. It features an X58 Intel chipset, which was obviously the first one to support the new processors. Now the X58 is a pretty impressive chipset as it was the first one to support both ATI Crossfire, before AMD acquired ATI of course, and NVIDIA SLI. As you can see, we have 3 PCI Express slots here. Only 2 can do the full 16x speed. So obviously this is designed to run 2 video cards on the same board. If you only have 1 video card, you can set the board basically to run 16x on the first one and 8x on the remaining 2. So it is pretty flexible. Underneath these heatsinks, we have 16 phases for the CPU and 2 phases for the memory controller, which for the first time is integrated inside the CPU and not on the motherboard. And speaking of memory controllers, the i-series CPUs featured 3 memory channels, and this board offers 6 slots of DDR3. As you can see, they are fully populated, which are taking advantage of the 3 channels from the CPU itself. As you might expect from a $300 motherboard, we have plenty of input outputs here. Most importantly, we have 2 1 gigabit Ethernet sockets available, we have FireWire, we have eSATA, we have 8 channels audio, digital audio as well, and 8 USB ports available. On top of the standard input outputs from the X58 Intel chipsets, this motherboard features a Marvell 88 SE6320. This is a SAS controller, serial attached SCSI for SAS hard drives obviously, which are also backwards compatible with SATA hard drives. So if you basically have a couple extra SATA ports if you want to add more drives to the board. This little guy here is a Marvell 88 SE6111, which is a single IDE and eSATA controller. Now, for a 2008 board, probably IDE was really not necessary, but again, this is a high-end board, and I guess, you know, more is better for this range of boards. This motherboard features an i7-940, again it's the first generation of the i-series processors. If I remember right, the first generation was kind of the warm side as they were not energy efficient processors. I happen to have an i7 2600K, which was much cooler than this system. I was actually pretty happy that I waited a little bit for the following generation, because these boards were pretty renowned for running on the warm side. Pretty powerful, but not the coolest. The 940 is a 4-core processor with 8 thread running at a base frequency of 2.93 GHz and with a turbo frequency of 3.20 GHz. This is a 120 watts TDP processor. I believe the following generation was 95 watts. Now, this board works. The problem is that the 2 middle slots here don't work, or if something is installed into these slots, depending on the configuration, the system will not post at all. So let me show you what I mean. Right, here we go, I've got everything connected up. I'm going to run these Zotac GTX 480, which is also faulty, but this works until you load the drivers. It also gets into Windows, it's just you can't install drivers on it. You should be able to see this board on a future video when I'm getting to that. The memory modules I have installed on these boards, they basically came as kit, as a 3 channels kit. These are XMS3 DDR3 Platinum series from Corsair, 1600 MHz, 2 MB per module. So the system should see 12 MB because it's going to be 4, 4 and 4. So let's power this up and let me show you what the system recognized with all the memory modules populated with 2 GB memory DIMM. Let's power up the power supply. Power supply is 750 watts from Cooler Master. And conveniently, because this is a $300 motherboard, I have the on-off and reset buttons on the board itself. Very convenient, definitely worth the $300. Okay, let's power up now. These are the 2 Marvell controllers initializing, as I said. That's the 88 SC63, I think that's the SAS controller. And then we have the 88 SE61, which is the IDE controller. Now, I'm assuming the battery is also dead, because every time I power up this board, after a while, it basically talks about recover the BIOS settings, so we'll check the voltage as well. But for the moment, let's press F2 and continue with the booting. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to digress a moment on this Ventoy thing. I discovered this just a few days ago and I find it amazing. So the way this works, you can see here I have a list. I have memtest for UEFI BIOS, I got the memtest for legacy BIOS, which is the 437, I got Ubuntu, I got the Ultimate Boot CD, I also have Windows 10 22H2. Now, before discovering Ventoy, I should have had 5 different USB sticks. And I don't know about you, but I'm terrible at organizing these USB sticks. And the worst thing is you have a USB stick that says Windows 10 on it, yes, but which version? You have a USB stick that says memtest on it, yeah, but which version? Is that the one that runs with, is that the latest version? Do I need to upgrade it? And if you need to upgrade it, you have to download everything, re-flash everything. It takes time. This thing is amazing. You install Ventoy on the USB stick, and then you end up with a partition where you just save the ISO or IMG files, and you can then select them from the boot menu like this. It's amazing. So when a new Windows version comes out, you just chuck the ISO into that folder, or when there's a new memtest, or when there's something else, or whatever you need, just chuck it in the folder. So you carry one USB stick and it's got everything in it. I really like it. So in this case, this is an old board, so I'm going to select memtest 437. As you can see, Ventoy just takes care of it, and I can run the 4x4.3 version. There it is. You can see here that says memory 8 GB. So clearly 2 of those sticks are not seen by the motherboard. Now, before start tinkering with these modules, I just wanted to understand how these modules are connected to the CPU. Now, if you follow this channel, you know that I'm usually not dealing with this modern stuff. So if I'm getting like a very old motherboard, usually the memory modules, if I'm not mistaken, they're all parallel together, like the address line, the data lines, and they go back to the CPU or memory controller or whatever it is. So I thought, well, if these are all parallel together, I was a bit puzzled that the middle sockets were not working. So I didn't know, I wasn't sure about that, so I had a look online. I've just educated myself, trying to understand how this works. And first of all, it turns out, as I said, this is the first CPU where the memory controller is inside the CPU itself. So that means there's basically nothing between the RAM and the CPU. The RAM goes straight to the CPU, which is great. So you don't have chipsets or something that can, BGA balls that can fail or anything. There should be a direct line between the memory slots and the CPU itself. Now, as I said before, this CPU offers 3 memory channels. All the address lines, all the data lines, everything, the 3 sets of those from the CPU socket. Then someone was kind enough to provide me with the board view of this motherboard. It's amazing. Now, if you don't know board view, I mean, this is one of the many software available. The idea is you have your schematics here, you have all the pins, and what happens is that when you select one of the pins on the board, it basically tells you here on the right hand side, first of all, what it is, and secondly, which other pins are connected to that one. So for example, I selected this one and I can see that this is also connected to this one. And it's also, it's a bit on the small side, but it's also connected here. You see this yellow pin here. So I started looking into that, and first of all, the topology of these board, you basically have channel A, which are the first 2 slots, then you have channel B, which is the second 2 slots, and the third pair is channel C. If I'm selecting these data lines and address lines, you can see they end up on both modules. So for both modules, there's one corresponding pin on the CPU. So what happens here is that this pin here is basically directly connected to both of these pins here. And this is actually called T-topology. Apparently there are 2 ways of connecting channels on this type of motherboards. One is called daisy chain, where basically the address line or data lines is going from the CPU to the first module and then to the second module. And then you have the T-topology type, where the signal is going to the both module, but in this fashion. T-topology basically makes sure that the distance between the CPU pin and the relevant pins on the DIMMs is the same. This is beyond the scope of this video, but each one of the connection has its own advantages. What matters is that the relevant pin from the CPU is going straight on the sims, and it's basically parallel together. These pins are all parallel together. Now, the exception obviously are pins like the CS, the chip select, which are unique for each team. So what does that explain me? Well, first of all, it makes totally sense that you have two modules not working. If you have a connection issue, it will affect both modules and only on this channel. Now, the other thing is, because neither of these modules work, B1 and B2, I'd be tempted to think that we have a problem on the CPU side, or the CPU is damaged. But the thing is, if there was a trace issue with one of the modules, I think one module might work and the other might not. But because neither of these modules are working, I feel that the issue is on this side of the connection. So enough with schematics, and let's try and fix this thing. But you know that I like to troubleshoot things and try to understand new things, because everybody is capable of spraying some contact cleaner and resolve the problem. Now, we've been reseating these memory modules 100 times and it's never changed anything, so I doubt there's an issue with corrosion or anything. But this board belongs to a friend of mine. I don't think he has contact cleaner, so we can definitely use some contact cleaner on these slots and see if by any chance that works. If it doesn't, I'd like to inspect the slots with the microscope and see if I can see anything. If I don't see anything and it still doesn't work, then I guess it's time to remove the CPU, clean it at the back, and also inspect the socket for damage. And no, we still have 8 GB, which is good, because that would have been a very boring video if some contact cleaner was all we needed. So next step, let's fire up the microscope and let's have a look at those sockets. Okay, here are the memory modules. Let's take a look. Let's start from the black one. And no, both sockets look to be in great shape. They look brand new, to be honest. There's no corrosion or anything, as you would expect from something which is basically used once when you purchase the motherboard and you fit the modules. Both colors are fine, so let's move on and let's have a look at the CPU socket. Oh, look at that. I think we found a problem. Oh, wow. What's that? It's interesting. Thermal paste? Is it damage? Let's take a look under the microscope, because that's pretty interesting. Oh wow, that is dirt and there's some liquid here. Could it be some kind of thermal paste which has somehow released something on it? Yeah, I also see some thermal paste in there, so whoever installed this CPU at some point just did a little bit of a mess and spread some thermal paste on the back of the CPU itself. It can happen. Right, let's take a look at the socket as well since we're here. See if we can see any damage at all. Yeah, there's definitely quite a lot of dirt in here. So let's spray some compressed air. Hopefully I'm not damaging anything. Oh, we have some damage there. Yes, there's a damaged pin. Oh my gosh. I never try to straighten one of those pins, so it's gonna be interesting. As I said, this was the first time I was trying to fix a pin of a CPU socket, and it's not for the faint of heart, because once it's broken, it's broken. So I was trying to fix this thing, which is not just bent, it's bent and twisted. So it's kind of a difficult task, to be honest. But with a little bit of time, I managed to get it back to some sort of the original shape, which is nowhere near what you would expect, to be honest, and was probably needed to make good contact with the back of the CPU. But that's a good start. And then I went around removing some dirt from the rest of the socket, which will need to be washed anyways. And I found this one, which was a bit bent as well. I've checked the datasheet for this socket, and the pin in question should be, I think it's L36, which happens to be one of the, not sure whether it's the address line or data lines for channel 1. So obviously we have channel 0, channel 1 and channel 2. So clearly that pin will need to go back in a decent shape enough so that it makes contact with the CPU. I'll do my best, but the thing is the pin has lost its shape, it's being completely bent, so I guess it's going to be very fragile. It's lost its shape, it needs to have the little peak at the top so it actually contacts at the back of the CPU. I'll do my best, I'm not entirely optimistic about that. And I wasn't very optimistic, but I used this technique and would you look at that, I managed to untwist the pin, which has now regained some sort of the original shape. I mean, it's obviously it's never going to be perfect, but I think this is going to be totally fine just to touch and make contact with the pad at the back of the CPU. So it looks like this one is also slightly deformed, which is kind of weird because it doesn't look like damaged. I mean, it's perfect shape, just the tip here is not as curved as this one. I'd like to leave it for the time being, see if it works this way. It could be just a slightly factory defect. Okay, time to give it another go. 3, 2, 1, go. See if it posts. And it does not. So let's go back to that pin, see if I can make it even better. And I fiddle with that pin a bit more. To be honest, I'm a bit puzzled why this is not working, because I feel it should work. But you know, tolerances here are very, very small, so it's also kind of understandable. I also try and rebuild the tip of this one, which I feel is just the way it came out from the factory line. But most importantly, I washed the whole socket using dry contact cleaner. That came out pretty well because all the grime and dirt and dust just disappeared and the socket came back, I would say, almost looking brand new. Okay, let's test it again and let's power up in 3, 2, 1, go. And nope, still not posting, which is kind of weird because those pins look good enough. But clearly, you know, those are high frequency signals, so it has to be perfect. The tolerances there are very, very, very small. Now let's just double check that the whole system is still working. Let's just remove channel B memory modules to make sure that everything is still working. Let's power up. Yeah, and the system is posting, so everything obviously is still working. We still have an issue with those memory channels, so I guess I'll have to give it another go. Okay, a little plot twist. What I've done basically, I just removed channel B, which is on the desk there, and I put channel A in channel B. Now, because channel B is not working, I'm expecting to see 2 and 2, 4 GB of RAM, and, well, I see 8. So channel B is working now, but channel A is also working because when I'm removing channel B, I do have 8 GB. I'm not sure, but, you know, before I keep tinkering with that socket, at this point I'm like, you know, let's make sure that we don't have some dirty memory modules or something. So maybe let's clean all the sockets on the motherboard and make sure that there's definitely something wrong with something. Another thing I'm doing now is to make sure that I'm going back to the original sets of RAM. So using those numbers on the sticks, basically now got like 6 GB and 6 GB, and I'll make sure that these are kept as a group. So they go channel 1, 2, 3, channel 1, 2, 3, which I guess is the way it should work. Now, as a starter, what I'd like to do, I'd like to just use the orange slots, because I think if you only have 3 modules, that's how you are supposed to install these modules first. So let's try now. I'm pretty curious. Whoa, we got 6 GB. Oh, that's great. I've never seen that. So we know that channel B, at least the orange one, is working. Now that I know that these 3 memory sticks work, I'm going to swap them for the other set. Because what I want to do now is want to make sure that I have 6 working memory sticks. I don't want to go ahead with any more troubleshooting unless I know that my 6 modules are all working. And let's power up and see what happens. And would you look at that, the motherboard only sees 4 GB, so one stick is not being seen. And I've done a little bit of troubleshooting off camera, and it doesn't matter where I put that stick, it just doesn't work. I actually have one faulty memory stick, which doesn't really help when I'm troubleshooting a memory related issue with the motherboard, right? That's it, this is my faulty memory stick, I've cleaned it, I've tried everything, this just refuses to work. The system was pretty temperamental at this point. First of all, the motherboard has been failing to power up intermittently since the beginning. It would do this. It's almost as something is shorted on the board, and yes, it happens with a different power supply as well. For this, I suspect it could be the battery, as I'm aware some systems don't like having a flat battery. So let's check that out now. Oh yes, it's completely dead, so let's replace it with a new one, and let's hope it takes care of this issue. The following day, I found some DDR3 modules in my stash. These are 2GB modules, so I can replace all the Corsair ones for testing. While the motherboard now seems to be posting all the time with no issues, well, I guess the faulty memory stick and a dead battery had something to do with that, the system would detect a different quantity of RAM every time. Usually either 8 or 10GB, depending on the mood. And on one occasion, I got this. This only happened once and never happened again, which is great when troubleshooting, right? At some point while testing, the system recognized the full 12GB of RAM, and I didn't do anything, I just power cycled the board. So I took advantage of that special moment and I let the system run 2 mem test cycles and they both passed successfully. But when I power cycled the system immediately after that, the system failed to post altogether. So my gut's feeling tells me that the connections under the CPU might still not be great. However, I discovered a mistake I made when I looked up to find out what kind of signal that bent pin was. I thought it was a data or address line for channel B, but when I double checked on board view, I discovered it's actually a ground pin. And that is great news, as it doesn't really matter if one ground pin is not making good contact, I guess. What might have happened was that the pin was barely touching the adjacent one, which is indeed part of channel B data or address lines. The owner of this board has confirmed me that all 3 channels used to work fine, even though with only 3 modules in them. So maybe the bent pin eventually ended up touching the adjacent one with time and thermal cycle? It's really hard to say, to be honest. I guess I should take a final look at that socket, but this time focusing on the other pins and not the one I fixed, which seems not to be so critical. So I took another look at the socket and I found this, the green stuff. It was there before, but I didn't notice it. Here is a frame from earlier on, you can barely see it. It looks like some kind of corrosion. Now, I hope the pin is okay underneath, as there is not much I can do to fix this, besides trying to stop the corrosion. Usually I stop the green corrosion from lithium batteries using vinegar, as the chemical process causing the corrosion is an alkaline one, so vinegar should neutralize it. I'm not sure this applies here, but I'll put a drop of vinegar on this green stuff, then I'll try to dislodge it and hope that the acidic solution stops whatever type of corrosion is happening here. Obviously, I'll have to rinse the socket well when I'm done. The schematics identify this pin as part of the QPI port. I really don't know what that is, so if someone knows what the QPI port is, please do leave a comment down below, because I'd be curious to know what that is. Now, one thing I've noticed is that I was inspecting the back of the CPU again. It looks like there's some oily substance on it. I don't know where this is coming from. I know it was oily in the first place, so I'm kind of okay if I have some oily stuff on the edges, but I got like patches of liquid stuff, oily stuff on the rest of the surface as well. And that's not great, because again, this contact cleaner I've been using is the dry one. This doesn't leave any residues whatsoever. So where is this coming from? I'm tempted to try and rinse the socket a bit more using this contact cleaner, because that should dissolve any greasy substance which might be under the processor, under the socket. Well, once I started the system, after cleaning it again, I've got this message: new CPU installed. Please enter setup to configure your system. I take it as a good sign, I guess. Hopefully it's reading something that I wasn't reading before, I don't know. But let's try and be optimistic and... oh, wait. It's giving me the memory counter here. It only says 8. Boo. That's not good. And I just restarted the board, and as before, it now reads 12 gigabytes. So it's still very temperamental, which is very frustrating. Now, the next step I'd like to try is to update the BIOS, because if I'm not mistaken, this board is on a very old version of BIOS, and you never know, maybe this memory issue is a known issue or something that has been improved over time. It doesn't hurt to try and update anyway, so let's go and take a look. Right, here we are on the P6T Deluxe, not version 2, this should be version 1. Version 2 I think doesn't have the SAS controller. So the latest firmware is 2209, which is not from 2022, but 2209 from 2010. And the existing version is from 2008, 1102. So 1102 is, as I said, and it's several versions down from the latest one. Now, well, there's improved memory compatibility on basically every step. You never know. To be honest, it doesn't hurt. It's something I wanted to do anyway, so I've got this latest firmware. There's also a firmware for the Marvel 88SE6320, which is the SAS controller. So I'll have to update the BIOS first and then update to this version of the SAS controller. And here we are in Easy Flash 2, the BIOS flash utility from Asus. It's taken me a while to get to this point, because apparently you can't just plug a USB stick and expect the USB stick to be recognized. You have to reboot it. Here's my ROM file downloaded from the website. But first, I see there's a backup option, so, you know, I know that this ROM is also on the website. I'll just save a backup just in case, and then I'll proceed with the upgrade. So Easy Flash is now saving the existing BIOS on file, which is great. One good thing about this board is it has an old-fashioned ROM chip, which is removable, so anything happens, to be honest, I can just grab my programmer and I should be able to reprogram it. Okay, so now we can go ahead with the new ROM and select it. Let's go ahead and upgrade. Finger crossed. And it worked. Well, should have. Well, it's booting, which is great. Now let's get back into the BIOS, and we are on 2209, which is great. We've got 12 GB of RAM. Now, one thing I've been noticing since last time I reassembled this motherboard is it's been posting every single time. So hopefully the new BIOS will take care of the rest. I'm very optimistic. Well, we've got 12 gigabytes. I would say let's power cycle it and see if by any chance it still comes back with 12 gigabytes. That would be the first time in a while, but it hasn't happened, especially when power cycling the board. Still have 12 gigs. Well, hopefully, hopefully this is it. So, you know what? Let me plug a Windows 10 drive and see if this thing behaves. Well, good news, I got Windows 10 installed on an SSD, random SSD I have, and I've been running Limpack Extreme 1.1.5. As you can see, we got 12 gigabytes detected. The CPU is running on the hot side, it's now 78 degrees, but again, it's a 940. It's been running for a few minutes. Everything has been fine so far, so that's pretty good. Now, Windows 10 installation has been flawless, as you know, it's rebooted several times. I haven't seen 8 gigabytes anymore, so hopefully that was it. I will keep testing, but right now the next thing I'd like to do is to try and upgrade that Marvel firmware. I've used Rufus to create a FreeDOS disk, and I'm gonna try to boot this thing in MS-DOS or whatever DOS it is, and see if I can complete the upgrade on this board. The Asus website did not have any instructions on how to update this firmware, so I had to improvise. The update utility is called MVF, and if I run mvs-l, I can see an adapter listed, which is great. Now, to be on the safe side, I'll first extract the backup of the current BIOS with the -bkup option. Then I can push the latest version, which suspiciously shows as version hard. Well, I guess everybody at Marvel loves us. When I push the update, I get a very enthusiastic status update, but everything went well and I had no error messages. And when I check the current adapter version using MVF, yes, it's now version hard. But what matters is that once rebooted, the firmware of the 88SE6320 is now version 3.1.0.2300, which is updated from the previous version 3.1.0.12. So, happy days! Now, this motherboard comes with this horrible contraption, which is a fan which stands on this heatsink, which is the VRM heatsink, which is then connected through heat pipes throughout the whole motherboard. It's horrible, it's hideous, and it's incredibly noisy. Let me see if I can show you. Yeah, there's definitely an issue with the bearings. Now, lubricating the bearings is never a good solution for fans. I'm hoping that this is kind of an option if you are like overclocking the CPU, or you want to be fancy and you want to have an extra fan on top of the heatsinks. That being said, I can feel there's a little hole behind it. I would say let's dismantle this horrible thing and clean it and see if we can make it a bit quieter. And then I hope whoever gets this motherboard will just disconnect it and throw this away. Well, it is working and it's not vibrating as it was before. So yeah, for now it's going to be good. Again, I hope it's not going to be used. Okay, well, the system has been running for a while. I've been running stress tests for a long while and it's passed all the tests, but most importantly, every time I reboot, restart, power cycle the thing, it just works. It feels very, very reliable. So what I've done at some point, I removed all the memory modules, put them back, swapped them with something else, and it works every single time. So I'm really, really happy because I haven't seen this board booting reliably as in the past couple of hours. Now, you might notice that the memory DIMMs on the motherboard are not the Corsair that I was using at the beginning. And the thing is, I've got like a bag of these modules. These are Hynix modules, but they are 4 GB each and not 2 GB each. So the system right now is running a whopping 24 GB, which is, I understand, the maximum that this system can handle. Now, right now, I'm running a benchmark of Limpack. Again, it's passed all the tests, but most importantly, the system has been booting quickly, reliably every single time. There's only one exception. And the exception is when I'm using these module, which I mark with an X at some point during the video. To be honest, this looks like a faulty module, because whenever I install these module basically prevent the other one on the same channel from working. So I guess this is it. I will keep testing this board probably for a few days to make sure that everything is good and everything is working reliably, but it looks like this board is now working perfectly. Good news, it works. I've been testing this with Cinebench 23, also with Limpack for several cycles. It's been absolutely stable, but most importantly, it now posts and boots up with 12 GB of RAM every single time. There is no hesitation, no issues, no beeps, no nothing. And I've been testing it when warm, but also when very cold in the morning, when I don't have heating turned on in this room. At some point, just to be on the safe side, try to trigger any possible issues could be still happening in the background. I removed the memory modules, put them back in, still 12 GB. At some point, I removed the CPU. I just wiggled that back in the socket, put the heatsink back on, and it's working. It's working absolutely totally fine. You can see Cinebench is running. I'm sorry for the very low resolution, but this video card is broken as well, and it doesn't accept any driver, so 800 by 600 is the only resolution I can run. But it's working. The temperatures are also pretty good. It's now 70 degrees. It's been running for only a few minutes. But I'm actually pretty impressed. Is 940 only 70 degrees, but I guess 70 degrees back in the days was quite a temperature. Why nowadays we are now used to 95 degrees all the time or something like that? I don't want to know. My only final comment is I don't really know what the problem was, because the RAM apparently was working before. Now, we definitely have one faulty memory module, but there was definitely an issue with those sockets. So I think it was a combination of the BIOS being on a very old version, and on top of that, I guess the dirt under the CPU, the dirt on the socket, and that bent pin. I don't know, but all I know is it's working. That was the first time I was actually fixing a bent pin on a socket, so it was a great experience. I totally enjoyed that one, and at some point in one of my future videos you will see me fixing this video card, or at least trying to do that, and we'll see how it goes. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, as usual, I would appreciate if you could hit the like button down below and consider subscribing to this channel if you like what I'm doing here. For now, thanks for watching, I wish you a great day, and I hope to see you soon again here on my channel for my next videos. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Bye.